Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises with a very special guest. That is not just a one-time guest. He might be, coming over and staying in the guest bedroom now and again. He's Dan Wetzel of Yahoo Sports and the College Football Enquirer. I am sure there are people watching and listening to this who have watched and listened to Dan and his colleagues talk about college football on their show. It's one of the best college football shows and podcasts around, and Dan has been one of the best national sports columnists in America for the last, at least last 3 or 4 years. I really felt like you hit your stride, maybe like in 2021, Dan, really like zeroed in it. Before then, you were okay. You were okay. But he's been doing it for like 25 years. He followed Tom Brady out of the locker room. That was a famous thing you wrote. And now he's here to talk about college football with us. Dan Wetzel, thanks for joining Kings of the North.
Thank you for being on. I love it. I love the whole premise of the show. So you know that. We talked about it, but this is great.
Are you in the North right now? Are you in the North?
I am in the North. I'm in Metro Detroit.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think this.
We don't claim it. Charlotte.
No, or not even like, I don't know, Cincinnati or something that might be like borderline. No, this is it. The real McCoy. I got snow shovels.
There you do.
I got snow shovels.
See, you know the threshold for being here. Yeah. So we actually are going to have Dan on Kings of the North through the college football season. I think he's going to make some regular appearances because we want to have smart, interesting people on to talk about college football. And we want to have a smart, interesting conversation today. And it's about the Saban hole in college football. And Dan, I brought up this idea to you, and I think you're a great person to talk about it with. I think perhaps, actually, I'm going to take out the perhaps. And 3, 2, 1, I took out the perhaps. I think college football as a whole so far is underestimating the retirement of Nick Saban. He's not gone. He's on ESPN. He's still around. And he hasn't vanished from our lives, but he's not coaching a team this year. And I think that is a gigantic deal for the present and future of college football. I think it completely changes the landscape of the sport. I think a lot of what the South has done for the last 20 years has actually been what Nick Saban has done. And I don't know that we're talking about it that way as the season starts. When he retired, it was like, oh, Nick Saban, he's the greatest. He's leaving. But I think it blows a bigger hole in college football than maybe we're acting like it does at the moment.
Well, I think that's correct. I don't know that everyone's kind of processed it. There's so much change in the sport that, expanded playoff, new expanded leagues, the Pac-12 no longer existing, NIL, transfer portal, all these different things. And it's like, oh yes, also Saban retired. In any other year, this would be the single biggest thing in the SEC. I don't know that it's bigger or as big as Texas and Oklahoma showing up and, a league's now thinking maybe we can get 4 playoff bids or something like that, which opens up. So I understand. But he was the North Star of this sport. You had to go through Saban. He was, what he built at Alabama was just immovable. And I remember Dabo Swinney when Clemson he was always a big focus on the next climb, and he had to beat Florida State in the ACC, and then they finally had to beat Alabama. And he said, we have to beat them because they're the best. We have to beat them in a championship game. And if we didn't, it wouldn't quite be the same. And I remember thinking that's it's a bold way of looking at it, but I think it's true. I think Michigan last year had to beat Alabama. It was part of the, if Alabama hadn't gotten in, it's Florida State without a court, and then they beat Washington. How legitimate is that national championship? Now we went, took on Alabama, beat them. And he just was that he was either beating you or he was the bar you had to clear. And it was never going to be easy. There were really no down years. He was the guy you could count on Saturdays late in the season. He was going to be on TV, even if you didn't always follow. He was Alabama's playing so-and-so. So-and-so's good this year. LSU's good this year. They're going to take on Alabama. Got to watch that game. I think his presence was enormous. And the sport, I want the sport to have more parity at the top. I didn't really love it when it was, you'd go into a season, there'd be 3 teams could win it. But I think that the idea of having that one just constant that you had to go against and not having that anymore, if that's the case, And I'm not expecting Kalen DeBoer. He might do a great job, but he's not going to get 7 national championships. That's a big deal.
You nailed it exactly right. In the 10-team college football playoff era, Bama won 3. Everybody else went through Bama to get theirs. Clemson's 2 going through Bama. Georgia's 2 going through Bama. Ohio State in 14 through Bama. Michigan last year through Bama. LSU in 19, not in the playoff, but in the regular season. What made us realize that LSU was as good as they are with Joe Burrow? It's that they beat Tua Tagovailoa and Nick Saban and Alabama. They were the standard for themselves and for the entire sport. And sometimes you have to stare obvious in the face and point at obvious even more because it's so important. And I think you're right that if we weren't talking about Oregon and USC joining the Big Ten and Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC and what's happening in the ACC, is it going to blow up? And the 12-team playoff for the first time, Saban would be the story. But I would argue that that's still the biggest story. The on-field biggest story, I think, is still that Nick Saban is gone. Because, as you said, he's impossible to replace. Is Kalen DeBoer the best they could have done? What do you think of that hire? Is he the right guy to try to do this?
I mean, he's an elite coach, right? And so you take the power of Alabama and you put an elite coach in there, proven himself at Fresno, proven himself at Washington, and you put him into Alabama and you give it a shot. And again, Kalen DeBoer can deliver a Hall of Fame level career there, a Hall of Fame level run. It doesn't mean he's going to win 7 national titles, right? That's our 6 at Alabama. So that's kind of where your standard is. It's not replaceable. I think he was a terrific hire. And I think so far, the question with Kalen DeBoer going in, we'll get more into that or more into Saban, but was, can he maintain the recruiting? Because one of the things that you didn't really expect out of Saban, if you had your first inclination of him, was he would turn into the best recruiter perhaps we've ever seen, where he was just racking up so much talent, bringing so much talent into Alabama. And some of that was right guy, right place. But his message hit, and he was able to go anywhere in the country and take your 5-star away from you, which was also a factor. And he was basically able to have more talent to work with and then coach them impeccably than any other program. So it's very hard to beat them because you had to get to a level where you could even compete on the field, player to player. Then you had to defeat him strategically. So what we look at so far, and this is, I think, what you have to be very excited if you're an Alabama fan, is Kalen DeBoer's recruiting extremely well. Now, is this going to be one of these Nick Saban classes that just, one day you look, they had 5-6 first rounders? I don't know. But they have, I think they're number 2 in most of the rankings. They have a number of 5-stars. And if you look at where their 5-stars are coming from, it's California, it's Texas, it's Mississippi. It's not just in state or anything like that. He got a really good player out of Ohio. So Kalen DeBoer is showing the ability to harness what is already a great recruiting situation at Alabama and potentially keep Alabama in that elite of elite recruiting programs, which I think has lately been Georgia, Ohio State, maybe Clemson at times, maybe LSU, where you're in that mix where you have more talent than pretty much anyone else. And then you have to hope the coaching isn't good enough. So far, if you look at the resume, great hire. So far, hasn't coached a game. Done a great job early on in recruiting, which is a big part of Saban's secret.
Yeah, and I think that's where you would have said, I don't know about that, because he's been an elevator as a coach. He elevates Fresno State. He elevates Washington. Clearly, the coaching acumen is there, but do you keep the aura? And that's the thing, right? Of like, you can think like, well, Bama's always going to be Bama, but let's go back before Nick Saban. Bama wasn't Bama then. So the idea that the aura that existed, and I think when great coaches are at great programs, eventually they meld and they become one. Saban is Bama. Bama is Saban. What's the difference? There is no difference. Now you separate them and you have to ask yourself sometimes, well, what was really stronger in the end? And I think that Nick Saban, my guess would have been, when you separate Nick Saban and Alabama, for everything that Alabama is and has been, I think Nick Saban was the stronger side of that equation because they weren't Alabama for 20 years before he got there. They weren't. And I think if Nick Saban had left the Dolphins and gone to Georgia or Florida or gone back to LSU or gone to Michigan or USC or Ohio State or Texas, and Texas tried to get him once upon a time, had gone somewhere, had gone to a blue blood with resources, I think he would have had the same level of success he did at Alabama. I don't think it was Alabama specific. I think it was Saban specific. So then when you separate them, I didn't know for sure that like Bama's going to keep being Bama in recruiting. So tip of the cap so far to DeBoer.
So far. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Nick Saban goes for any of those programs and he's going to do amazing work. He had gotten his blueprint and the way he evaluated and the professional way they did it. And then once his track record got going, what I always found really interesting, he was able to not just recruit really talented players, but the type of kid that was willing to take on the Alabama challenge. You've got no playing time guaranteed. You've got to work for everything. You come in here, you have to do every single thing right, and you might get on the field. And he got those guys that wanted to be ball players. If I follow this system, we're going to win national championships. And if I can make the NFL, I'm going to make the NFL. I remember I remember hearing the story when he was, I think he was a rookie. Like Devonta Smith was doing some interview, and he said he had only, in his entire time at Alabama, went to 2 parties. At his entire time at Alabama, one was after the national championship. They won it when he caught the pass to win the game.
As a freshman, yeah.
You get to go to a party. And at one other time, he said one night they just went. Every other time, the guy was just sitting there thinking, how can I build up and get to that level? So it's like that was the kid they were getting, right? They matched what Saban's not party. Saban's, gets up at 6 a.m, has a little Debbie snack, talks to Miss Terry, gets in the office by 6:15. If he hits 2 red lights, he's angry, right? I remember covering his first national championship at LSU, and after the game, he launches into this complaint that it should be a dead period. The day of the championship game was the start of like a visitation period, and he was already behind on recruiting, right? And it's like, maybe all the recruits watched you just win the national title also. Maybe that's a little better than that one visit to one kid in Shreveport. But hey, he's Nick Saban. What do I know? So, he was able to attract that level of professional mindset of kid. And that was what I think he could have done that at any number of things. What Alabama did recently, having been down there, they have terrific administration. Greg Burns, very good at AD. They poured a tremendous amount of money, resources, and thought into what happens when Saban's not here. And they planned ahead and said, what do we need to have elite of the elite system set up, the structure? They just recently redid it. Was I'm going to get the number wrong. It was like $12 million. They redid their recruiting lounge and entrance, the entrance that recruits would have at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and then the lounge they would go to. So if you show up with, you're a sophomore and they say, come to a game, and you show up with your mom and dad, and this is the entrance you walk in, and it's it's a elaborate entrance, and then the hallway you go down, it's got all this is the NFL and all that type of propaganda, and then you're in a lounge that's decked out, and it was only like 6 years old, and they poured a bunch of money into getting that. It's little stuff, right? It's little stuff, and you go, that's not what does it. But when you're on that margin and you're a player saying, I can go to Georgia, play for Kirby Smart, I can go to Ohio State, play for Ryan Day, I can go to USC, play for, out there, do all that, play for Lincoln Riley. I go to it's always the margin, right? You're the guy that makes the difference. Has every situation's a good situation. You don't go, well, that was a terrible choice. Why would you ever go to Georgia? It doesn't really matter. So they did all of the stuff, the scouting department, the every resource they could put in, because they knew Saban's going to go. What do we do? You can't just sit there and say, hey, Saban can make up for deficiencies and stuff like that, right? But what if he's not there? Who can? So far in recruiting, we have seen that. Now, obviously, everything's going to matter on. It's a lot easier to recruit when you're going 12-1 every year and you're in the playoffs. Can they maintain that against the teeth of a very, very challenging SEC that gets more challenging with their rival Texas and Oklahoma.
And what a tip of the cap it will be to Saban and to Alabama and its administration if they can continue this. Because, like, if they did plan ahead and if there's enough of the Saban aura that now still permeates everything, one of the more famous stories that Joey Bosa had told when he was here at Ohio State was when he was being recruited by Alabama and he goes into Nick Saban's office and he sits down and Nick Saban's at his desk and he pushes a button under the desk and the door to his office shuts. And so this is like a philosophical thing. Maybe Descartes and his friend, I don't know, Plato, Were they friends? Like, where are those guys right now? Is it the man or is it the desk? Is it the guy who pushes the button or is it the button? Is it the act of the door shutting or is it the man who causes the door to shut? Because I assume they have the desk and the door and the button. But if it's not Nick Saban pushing it, is it the same effect? Because Joey Bosa, who picked Ohio State, was like, wow.
Right.
The button.
The little stuff, right? The little stuff that because everyone's got a nice office. Like you go to coaches, they're all nice. There's nobody just in a broom closet somewhere going, oh yeah, I'm a big time football coach. Look at my, they have these windows and all this different stuff. He used to have a table in his office around these couches, and it had all these rings kind of in it. And, every ring that he ever won back to, who knows what, like Kent State, maybe he won something, MAC title, or I don't know what he ever did back then. But, and it's just like, it was very impressive. But Kalen DeBoer has redone that office. I haven't been in there, but I've heard he's redone the office, said, hey, look, I got to do it my way. I kind of like that. You have to do it. I'm not Nick Saban. I'm not going to do it the Nick Saban way. I'll give you an example. Like, so Urban Meyer, right, who I think is his best coaching peer during this era, especially for a long time. Urban Meyer, I think at times was equal to Nick Saban, but he was burned hot and then would kind of run out. Saban was just steady. And, he left as a guy who lost in overtime of the semifinals. He's probably one play away from another national title. Meyer leaves Florida and they never get back. Right. They haven't been the same since. He leaves Ohio State and they haven't won the national title, but the recruiting, the results on the field, last game in November notwithstanding, are the same. So why was Ohio State and Ryan Day? Now, some of that is Ryan Day, opposed to who followed him in Florida, I'm sure. But Ohio State has got kind of that setup where almost any coach goes in there, they do really well. And Ryan Day's done really well. But how do you maintain that opposed to saying, hope we get the right guy?
And so there's a list of 14 coaches that we're going to get to later, but I have a little stat off those 14 coaches. It's about guys replacing legendary coaches in somewhat modern times. The guys that were chosen to replace those 14 coaches, 5 were inside hires, a promotion of an assistant. For instance, Jimbo Fisher was the coach in waiting behind Bobby Bowden at Florida State. 3 were alums who weren't on the current staff, but had gone to the school and obviously have a connection there. 3 were former assistants. Like Earl Bruce took over for Woody Hayes. He wasn't on Woody's staff at the time, but he had been on Woody's staff, and then he had gone to be the Iowa State head coach, and now he comes back, right? So there's a connection there. Kirk Ferentz taking over for Hayden Fry. He had been an assistant under Hayden Fry previously. So that's 11 of the 14 with a pretty strong connection to the school. Only 3 of those 14 would I consider pure outside hires that we just went and got what we thought was the best guy available. It's Mac Brown leaving Texas and Charlie Strong taking over. It's Frank Beamer leaving Virginia Tech and Justin Fuente taking over. And it's Jimmy Johnson leaving Miami and Dennis Erickson taking over. So at Texas and Virginia Tech, it didn't work out so great. Justin Fuente was good for the first 2 years, and then it fell off, and then they wound up parting ways after 6 years. Charlie Strong had a losing record, was 3 years and out. Should Bama have had somebody ready, or is this smart? Do you like the idea of like, let's just go get a guy who's a great coach? He doesn't have to be Dabo Swinney, who played at Bama. He doesn't have to be Lane Kiffin or Steve Sarkisian or somebody who bring Kirby back, which wouldn't have happened, but who coached under Saban. We just went and got a great guy. There's hits and misses on both. One thing, like the Urban Meyer to Ryan Day, is like that's inside. That's all structure staying. Did you think outside was good for Bama, or would they have been better off finding a guy with Bama roots to some degree?
So this is the thing about college football. I was with a bunch of ADs this spring, and we were trying to analyze the hires. And I go, you don't know. You never, ever know. Remember Nebraska hires Scott Frost to come back, right? Son of Nebraska, hero, just going 13-0 at Central Florida. He's going to bring all these Florida recruiting ties, and it doesn't work. How did that not work? Right. It has to work. It didn't work. You look at some of these great coaches right now, and they had no head coaching experience. Ryan Day had no head coaching experience. Dabo Swinney, no head coaching experience. You can go back a little bit, but Bob Stoops, no head coaching experience. Turns out to be, you just don't know who's going to be able to do it. And so that's the problem with trying to pick these things apart, because you go, well, you can't just hire the assistant. And then it's like, oh, well, it turned out that the assistant was Kirk Ferentz. Pretty great hire, right? But how do you know? So it's all hindsight. As a principal, I don't like the stay in the family bit. It doesn't make sense to me, because you are limiting your pool.
Yeah.
And why would you ever limit the pool? You got to know how Alabama football works. Is there really anything special about it, or when? Did Nick Saban know how Alabama football worked? He's from West Virginia.
Son of the North.
Played high school. Yeah, played college in Kent State. Was a Cleveland Brown assistant. Was a Michigan State coach. Went to LSU. But what's he know about Alabama? Well, he's the perfect guy, right? The cultural fit. They talk about Brian Kelly. Does he have the cultural fit? You win, you're culturally fit. That's all that matters. So as a principal, you want the best coach, and that's it, right? And so you could say, hey, would ideally you get, I'll take Kirby Smart. Well, he's probably the best coach in the country, and he used to be there, and he's got all those ties. Dabo played there, right, and has great love for Alabama. He's from Birmingham. Is that really going to make a difference in this day and age in recruiting or anything, or is it just, is the way Dabo wants to run a program gonna work at Alabama? So I say, look, you go out and get the best coach, and you hope it works, and you build that structure. Kalen DeBoer is a smart guy. If you're besides, as you would assume a major head coach would be, but he's particularly sharp. You don't go in there and go, what is this place about? I'm just going to run it like I did at Fresno. I mean,
right.
Of course you're going to embrace all the stuff.
Fresno of the South, man.
This is how we did it at Fresno. It'll be fine. No, of course you're going to embrace. You get some houndstooth. You get around the state. You do your thing. You learn. You meet the guys. Is there a little bit more of a learn? Look, can you coach? Can you win? They're going to have great players. They're going to have great players this year. They're going to have great players in the future. Can you coach them up and win those margins? Because everything at that level is the margins in college football. The smallest thing changes the greatest fortunes. It's what makes this sport so unbelievable. One play can define a guy. It can ruin a tenure. It can improve a tenure. Things can shift and change on just the slightest of small stuff. So I think Alabama, or any school that is looking to replace a guy, says, hey, we got that. Now, unless the timing is particularly terrible, or there's a particular reason, or you 100% believe in, hey, we got this guy right here. I think you go out and say, who's the best coach? Maybe it's in-house. Maybe it isn't.
So I think you can decide whether you think Kalen DeBoer was the right hire or not. But I think the real discussion that I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's a little bit of short shrift to it, is that Bama's going to take a step back to some degree regardless, which you said off the top, which is you can't think that Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach of all time, which he would be number one on my list, and think that they will be just as good. You can't think that unless you think Kalen DeBoer is the second greatest coach of all time. So here's my argument about how hard Nick Saban is to replace. I think it's possible that in modern American team sports, Nick Saban leaves the most gaping hole of anybody since Michael Jordan. I don't think that there is an NFL quarterback that left a similar hole. I don't think there is like a baseball player that left a similar hole. I think if you want to go individual sports, I think like, the PGA Tour with and without Tiger Woods, I think you could argue. And the reason is, as you said, he was a play away from maybe winning another national championship. He left on top. He's been compared a ton to Bill Belichick, obviously. Bill Belichick, his first 20 years with the Patriots, his winning percentage was .741. His last 4 years with New England, his winning percentage was .433. So from when he was really getting it done to the last 4 years, he had a drop-off of 300 points in his winning percentage. Nick Saban, his first 13 years at Alabama, winning percentage .872. His last 4 years, his winning percentage .891. He was better in his last 4 years than he was in his first 13. He left on top. It wasn't a national title, but there was no drop-off. There are not a ton of people in American sport who leave at their peak. And so Florida State, Bobby Bowden, there's a drop-off at the end. Hayden Fry, Iowa, there's a drop-off at the end. And Mac Brown, Texas, there's a drop-off at the end. And the drop-off actually helps prepare you. Oh, okay. Well, then like the standard's not quite as high for the next guy because it hasn't been perfect. But I think my list of hardest to replace in the last 40 years in American sports is Jordan 1, Nick Saban 2. And that's crazy. What do you think of that argument?
Well, I think it's interesting because I would probably look at players and coaches differently. Tom Brady, obviously, you just mentioned Belichick's numbers. There was something happened those last 4 years. Didn't have old TB12 bailing him out at the end of the games. But I would say that in terms of coaches, yeah, I don't think you're. And I get your premise. Jordan was a particularly interesting one because he literally left for 2 years and they fell apart and then they came back and then they win 3 more.
Yeah.
I think, but certain guys bring in, it's more than just what they do in the field. And I would say Jordan and Brady would be like this. It's the aura they bring around them. Right. So when it comes to this, I mean, I'm just looking at his record, right? Outside of you take the first year at Alabama out, 2007, what he's rebuilding, he's 199-23 since 2008. He's 116-14 in the SEC. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 seasons. He lost 14 SEC games. And one of them was he lost 3 in 1 year. I mean, it's absurd. So Alabama will undoubtedly take a step back. It's not going to just run off these 14-1 seasons with no problem anymore. How far back does it drop? What's reasonable with the playoff? Doesn't matter as much. You don't necessarily have to be perfect. You just have to you have to be perfect in December and January. How does this all play out with it? But I agree. I don't know how you. It just has to fall. It just has to fall back. It just has to. So how far that is, we'll see. But then again, I don't know. You look at some of these guys that take over and they don't fall back. So it's, Alabama is well positioned. Kalen DeBoer is a heck of a coach, but there's still something about Saban that I think will be special. Kalen DeBoer's got a lot to do. A lot of coaches, you talk to coaches, they say, well, you don't want to succeed the legend. You want to succeed the guy. You want to replace the guy, replace the legend, right? Hey, get that nice 2 years, didn't work out so well. I'm in, bang. Hey, we won 10 games. Everyone's all, they're throwing parades for you. You win 10 games here. Frank Solich, right? Frank Solich at Nebraska. 10, 11 wins. They got to get him out of here. Now that you win 10, Matt Rule wins 10 or 11, they're going to be, they're naming bridges after him.
Nick Saban, his 17 years at Alabama, they won 17 more games than anybody else in college football. So they won an average of 1 more game a year than the second best program, which was Ohio State. So that's the threshold. And I do want to talk specifically about the drop off here, which is where I didn't count the guys. If you had you tailed off at the end, and I didn't count Joe Paterno and Penn State because that just exploded. But if you didn't have a huge tail off, if you were still pretty good at the end, I looked at your last 5 years as a head coach and then the next 5 years after you left. And rather than try to deal with winning percentages, I just dealt with how many total wins did your program have. So this is 5-year increments for everybody. And I looked at 10 different programs that met this threshold. Mike, if you want to bring it up. Barry Switzer leaves Oklahoma. His last 5 years compared to the next 5 years, they're minus 13 in total wins. So that's like more than 2 wins a year that they're down when Barry Switzer leaves. Bear Bryant leaves Alabama, goes to Ray Perkins, who's an Alabama alum. He's good. He's not Bear Bryant. They lose 11. Tom Osborne to Frank Solich, you lose 11. Pete Carroll at USC to Lane Kiffin, and then everything goes crazy there. You lose 11. Lavelle Edwards at BYU to Gary Crowton, who was a BYU guy, you lose 11. I'm almost going to call this the rule of 11, that if you think that's like 2 games a year, let's be ready for Alabama to be 2 games worse a year than they were under Nick Saban. I don't think that's an unreasonable place to start. Lou Holtz leaves Notre Dame. They're minus 9 the next 5 years. Frank Beamer leaves Virginia Tech. They're minus 6. Bo Schembechler leaves Michigan to Gary Moeller. Gary Moeller does pretty well, actually, and Bo maybe tailed off slightly at the end. They're minus 4 at Michigan. Woody Hayes to Earl Bruce. They actually win one more game because Earl Bruce probably should have won the national title in 1979. They were undefeated and lost in the Rose Bowl. But then he becomes 9-3 Earl, and nobody likes that. Earl's not Woody, and eventually it costs him. And then the one that really stands out is Jimmy Johnson leaves Miami to Dennis Erickson. They're +1 because Dennis Erickson comes in and wins 2 national titles in the next 5 years. So first of all, Dan, like about 2 wins a year for more than half the people here. That's not Bama falling off a cliff, but that's Bama falling from the best program in college football to one of the good programs. It goes, you're from number 1, now you're like the 8th best program or the 6th best program. That's all I'm saying that people should be ready for. And that Bama's not Bama anymore. They're just good. That's what I'm expecting. Is that what you are expecting, or do you think DeBoer can do better than that? That Bama is still in the very top tier?
No, I would expect that. I would expect that. I expect Alabama to stay in that top tier. I think we're going to have a lot more parity at that top. I don't know that Nick Saban. So Nick Saban won a certain era of football, and we're now in a different era of football. And I don't, not to take anything from Nick Saban, because he probably would have adapted and done fine. But I don't know that anyone could. I don't know that even Nick Saban could do what he did. Nick Saban won in a time when the key acquisition of talent was load up on so many great recruits, high school recruits, that you could withstand attrition, guys going pro, injuries, guys not panning out, all of that. And the key to that was he had, I don't know, something like 9, 10 number 1 classes in a row. Mm-hmm. I remember they played a game in Notre Dame in the playoff, and before the game, I look, and Alabama has 22 5-stars on their roster, and Notre Dame has 2. Now, 5-stars are generally about 30 guys. There's about 30, 35, about 35 kids get a 5-star by the end. It's basically a first-round draft pick in the NFL, if you will. Imagine a team with 22 first-round draft picks in the NFL playing a team with 2 first-round draft picks. Not only that, most of Saban's 5-stars were like pick 1, 2, 4, 7.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. They're like, really good 5-stars. Yeah.
You're going to win. Okay? You can withstand when they go pro. Now we have a whole new era. And even if you look at what Michigan did last year, they are able to keep, they don't have 5-stars. They've had maybe 1 or 2. Depends how you had JJ McCarthy. Donovan Edwards was kind of Will Johnson was definitely a 5-star. Yeah. A few guys, right? That was it. They had a whole bunch of really good 4-stars and 3-stars, but they were able to, with NIL, keep those players from saying, I'm going to be the third. I'm going to jump to the NFL, right? Blake Corum comes back. Zach Zinter comes back. Cornelius Johnson, all these guys come back. Now they're loaded with excellent 4- and 5-star, and they are able to go out and pick. Well, you know what? We're missing a safety. Let's go get a kid out of here. We're gonna get a transfer from UMass. He's gonna add depth to our back. We're gonna get this guy. We now have a 7th offensive lineman. Saban already had all that because he had recruited the high school players stacked up, and his advantage was I've got all these guys. You're Michigan. You're really good. You're Michigan. Michigan was never contending. Michigan got blown out 2 years before by Georgia. You're going to have a hole in your lineup, and we're going to beat it. We have no holes. Well, now the way they're building teams, Michigan didn't have a hole. It's an excellent football team. They had put 13 guys drafted, and they've got 4 first-rounders probably coming in next year. Like, this is a loaded team. They could go man-to-man against Alabama and in many ways have the better player. And so that's how you can build in 2024, 2023, and going forward, I think you'll see even more of it. You look at this Ohio State team. There's some of these teams, Oregon, the way they're able to do things that they couldn't do before. Again, really good programs. Ohio State is at the level of Alabama in terms of talent through years, but Michigan never was. And Michigan's one of the best programs in the country, one of the winningest programs. But the gap between Alabama and Michigan was massive. Not anymore. So I don't know that even the way Nick Saban was doing it would still work.
I mean, I always thought that whatever the rules were, Saban would win. Because
I would imagine
he complained about various rules over the past couple of years. Like, he didn't like, I think, all the transfers, and he didn't like some of the else stuff. But like, if that's the way it's going to be, okay, then that's what we're going to do.
Right.
So I did believe in the idea of like, whatever they said about Bear Bryant, he'll beat you with his and he'll beat you with yours. I think Nick Saban will beat you with the rules he likes, and he will beat you with the rules he doesn't like. And so I would have believed in that idea, but the evening out of the sport, some people thought NIL and the transfer portal would funnel everything to a couple teams. It's actually evened it out, right? To your point, that teams can patch holes, teams can target guys in NIL. And I do think that probably is coming, which leads me to the last question here. And the last thing that I wanted to discuss, which is, I kind of outlined the dominant team in the last like 60 years of college football by era. And certainly there are quibbles to be had here. But I tried to keep it to like one team. I didn't want to say like, because there really kind of were certain teams that dominated. So Nick Saban, and it's not only tied to a coach's time somewhere, it's like tied to when they really started getting it going. So my point is that I think Alabama, you would say they are the defining team in college football from 2009 to 2023, because that also coincides with like the end of the USC era. And I had a mini USC era when Pete Carroll was really getting it going. They play the game of the set. They win back-to-back titles in 03 and 04. They play the game of the century in 05. They're still right there in 6, 7, and 8. So I have 03 to 08. That felt like that's where the pulse and the heartbeat of college football was in Southern California. 1983 to 2002, I was just going to have this be the U, from Howard Schnellenberger to Jimmy Johnson to Dennis Erickson to Butch Davis to the beginning of Larry Coker. But I think you have to tip of the cap. Bobby Bowden was beating Miami a good chunk of the time there. They're a dominant program as well. But I think the heartbeat of the sport was in Florida, right? I think that's how we would have viewed the sport then. And then 61 to 82, that's just prime Bear Bryant. Now, so it's Bama again. And then 82 is when Bryant, it's really coincidental how some of this worked out.
You're going to, by the way, this graphic is going to get you stabbed somewhere. I mean, this is, be careful with this.
Especially, it's no north. There's no north. Take it down, Mike. There's no north.
I don't, that's 61 to 82. I mean, there's some Oklahoma fans that are going to be not happy with you. No, I'm only kidding.
They're Ohio State fans. You could argue there's certainly Ohio State's winning at a high level there.
Though. I get your point.
And certainly Tom Osborne in the 90s, he wins 3 titles in 4 years, but before that, he kind of was butting his head up against the Florida schools and couldn't quite get over the top. I think if you think about where the heartbeat of the sport is, and it's not just winning, it's like you're either winning or you are defined by that person. And so I think, right? So like when Penn State or Notre Dame or Nebraska, some of these other teams, they were defined by, could they beat Miami? Could you beat the Florida teams? There was a time you're defined by, can you, Will Ferrell and Snoop Dogg are going to practice at USC. Can you compete with that? We already talked about Bama clearly as the defining team. So I think it's the standard that you set. It doesn't mean that you win every game. And it doesn't mean there aren't other good teams. My point is this. There's a hole. Do you think a team will fill this and become the standard? Maybe it's Georgia. Maybe it's Ohio State. Maybe it's Texas. Maybe it's Oregon. Or do you think we are entering a world where in a 12-team playoff with NIL and the transfer portal, we will not have a team that sets a single standard that everybody points at them. It's that, hey, man, that's like 6 or 7 programs that you really got to hang with. Because I think I would argue that, like, you could argue with my list, but I can argue back. Right. It's like, okay, I think if we want to argue in the 60s and 70s, okay. But like the U into USC into Saban's Bama, I think you can make strong cases there for that was a standard. Is there a new team that will set a standard, or is it parity at the top?
Yeah, and I like your list, and I actually would start with 83 because I think that's when the sport got nationalized. I think before 83 it was very regional.
You own your area.
You owned your area.
Daryl Royal owns Texas, and Woody and Bo are doing their thing, and Bear Bryant's doing his thing, and John McKay's doing his thing on the West Coast. You can make that argument.
Right.
Sure.
I think it was
Oklahoma.
more regional. Everybody had their thing. If you looked at those old rosters, they just sweep. Like, first off, you could have like 200 kids on your team. They would just sweep up all the recruits. But they, maybe Woody or Bo is going to Florida for a kid or two, but not much, right? They're basically working the Midwest and the Saban maybe against Joe Namath or whatever. Most of these kids are from the South. It's regional. But once you got to the 80s, once you got cable, started like ESPN nationalized the sport, and then all of a sudden every kid wanted to go to Miami, Florida State, or Florida. There were times all three were in the top 5.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it really, that was the heartbeat. And I agree with that idea. And I think part of it is the recruiting. Right. And that's what we were talking about. Saban could go in and say, I'm going to get Caden Proctor is probably not going anywhere other than Iowa, except for Nick Saban. Right. And so you're these kind of kids. You just go in wherever I need to go get a guy. I'm going to go get him. And, I'll take Mark Ingram out of Michigan. Maybe he should have gone to Michigan or Michigan State, but I'm going to take him and we're going to go he's going to win a Heisman for me, stuff like that. So he was just going all over. I think it's the latter that you were talking about. I don't think we can have this bit because the ability to acquire talent is completely different. The way you build teams is completely different, and it opens up possibilities for more clubs. The advantage that of all those teams you had is they're all based in an area of the country with great proximity to talent. And that helps in high school recruiting when you're especially back then. If you're 17 years old and you can play close to home and be near mom and dad and your friends, and this is the school, all the kids in your high school think is awesome, you go do that. Now those decisions are different. There's money as a factor. It's more nationalized. Playing time is is important, and everyone knows you're not just sitting there saying, I'll just wait my turn 3 or 4 years. Even if you go to a smaller school, and then you can pick guys apart and say, hey, I want this quarterback. This guy isn't working well enough, right? Ohio State says, well, we got a good quarterback, but we think this one's better. We're just going to swap them out, right? Yep. I mean, Ohio State's got 1 or 1A roster this year, and they just sit there and change quarterbacks because that would never happen in the past. So everybody now can go find their players. And I think what NIL did and what the transfer portal has done is certainly amongst the top 20 teams, it has leveled the playing field. It has not leveled the playing field. The gap between the Mid-American Conference and the Big Ten is greater.
Yes.
But amongst the top 20, we just had, in the last 2 years, TCU, Washington, and Michigan play for the national championship. That could not have happened 6 or 7 years ago. Just couldn't happen. Teams get into the playoff and get destroyed. Other than Ohio State, everybody got wiped out, or Clemson, and then anyone in the Southeast. So I think the way you build teams now and the ability to do that, and then also it's about getting, in terms of national championships, it's about what do you have in December and January. You don't have to be this super team that never stumbles, right? Mm-hmm. This Kings of the North. I'll give an example. Like Michigan's team this year looks like an excellent defense, right? Should be a top 5 defense. They're loaded at defense. Who's their quarterback? What's the quarterback? Is the quarterback going to be good enough? I don't know. But he doesn't have to be perfect. If it's Alex Orji, he doesn't have to be perfect when they play Texas in the second week. And if they lose, they're not winning a national championship. He has to be good enough to get to December and be an 11 seed, right?
Right.
And now you're in, and Alex Orji's become a pretty good quarterback, and now all of a sudden we got the offense, right? So it's a different ball game. Before you had to be perfect all year, you had to be a juggernaut from day one, and that was the sensibility of the sport. Yeah, and that's why fans would get worried. It's an early season game. We're playing Marshall. We're playing Middle Tennessee. It's a little tight. I don't know if we're going to be good enough to win the national championship. Like, doesn't matter anymore. Be good enough to get in, and you look at the NFL. It's not always the 1 seeds that win this thing. 15-1 doesn't do it. That Patriots team that was 16-0, right? Probably the best NFL team I've ever seen in a regular season. They destroyed everybody. They lost to a Giants team that was 9-7 in a wild card. But when they got to the Super Bowl, their whole defensive line was healthy and they're rolling, and totally different game. Patriots aren't scoring 50 a game. They scored 14. So everything changes in this. So I think all of those changes, my feeling is it's going to be more wide open than it was in the past. I think we're already starting to see that. And I think we'll see it even more with this expanded playoff. So my guess is over the next 20 years, you're going to see, I don't know, 10, 12 different national champions or something like that.
That'd be great. Great for the sport. But the last note I want to end on is Kirby Smart is not guaranteed to be Nick Saban. I think it's disrespectful to Nick Saban to be like, Kirby's the next Nick, which they're at SEC Media Days saying that right now. Do you know what Nick Saban's record was in the SEC championship game? 9-1. He lost the first one to Urban Meyer and never lost again. Do you know what Kirby Smart is in the SEC championship game? 2-4. Do you know how many times in the history of Georgia football they have beaten Alabama in the SEC championship game? 0. Yeah. They've never done it. So, let's pull. I think there are people, Dan, most of what you'll learn this from me. When I get angry, I mostly get mad at the media for what they say about the sport. It's like, I'm not mad at the sport. I'm just mad at the other media people. So what, why are we anointing? It's like, Saban's gone. Kirby's filling the hole. No, he's not. Because Saban is the best to ever do it. The sport is changing as you have laid out. And man, let's not pretend that this wasn't practically a miracle what Nick Saban did. And it is not guaranteed that the next guy is just going to slide in. Because by the way, anybody who thinks that the sport the last 3 years has just been Georgia and everybody else is not paying attention. Georgia's good. I'm not saying Georgia's not good. I don't think Georgia's a cut above. I think Georgia's good and has gotten some breaks. And by the way, lost to Bama twice and might have lost again in the national title game if any Bama receivers were healthy. So, let's just chill out a little bit. Because don't you think people are saying that Kirby's the next Saban and Georgia's going to take over?
Yeah. Well, there's a sensibility in the SEC. I didn't go to SEC Media Days this year, but I usually go. And
you're not going anymore because you're staying in the North now.
I'm the Kings of the North. Kings of the North. The sensibility. Who's next? Obviously, we're going to have the dominant coach, right? It's got to be the next guy. Kirby's interesting. His level of success, 2 national championships in very impressive fashion. And I think that second one was really impressive because that was the year they were supposed to kind of slunk back and then bring it last year. And then last year obviously doesn't work out for him because of Alabama. You take Alabama out of the equation, you go, boy, things are wide open for Georgia. But again, totally different SEC now. Texas and Oklahoma are there. There's no longer divisions to get to the SEC championship game. So you're going to have to, you're not that might have worked for Georgia, but you're guaranteed to have to play somebody. Things are just different. You can't just win the East. I agree with you. He has not maintained. You have to see. There was a moment when you said Dabo Swinney is the next Nick Saban. It's rolling. And then, okay, the game has changed. The system has changed. He won't change, right? He won't take a transfer.
Right.
There were 4 programs that did not take a transfer last year. Army, Navy, Air Force, Clemson. Okay.
What a great place.
3 of them
great place to start. You know what? I'll tell you what. When we're storming the beaches, I want Clemson. When we're protecting ourselves against our enemies, I want the Tigers on the front line. No not transfers.
No transfers.
Dabo.
And he's like, no. And I love how Dabo has a great idea. He's like, well, I believe in my guys. I'm not going to, the way he talks, it's like you want it to work. Like, this would be how it would be. Not, I made a commitment to you. Come to Clemson. We'll develop you. You're going to be a starter. It's like high school football, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it's your turn. You're seniors. Let's go. Let's see what we got. That ain't going to win you 7 national titles. Won you 2.
Right.
When you got Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson back to back.
Yeah.
But can you do it? Well, obviously he's not going to be Nick Saban. Remember when Nick Saban was like, he didn't like the spread offense, right? He complained about the spread. Is this what we want football to be? Then he went and hired Lane Kiffin, and all of a sudden they started getting quarterbacks. Like they were winning with AJ McCarron, and then all of a sudden they got Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, they're just rolling with QBs because they bring in Lane, who's the least Saban guy you'll ever meet.
Yep.
And he goes, I got to deal with this guy, and he ends up firing him in the middle of the playoffs. But he knew Lane Kiffin brought something important to Alabama. He will change and do things to make himself uncomfortable if it means my program's going to be better. So you have to do that. So back to Kirby. Kirby's interesting as a personality because there are a number of very Saban-like traits to him. He's absolutely relentless. He's very, very competitive, very, very smart. When you talk to him one-on-one, there's a great forcefulness to how he is talking that is very substance-based, where sometimes these coaches, like, I'm not sure you get that. And so I think there's a great appeal, as I talked about earlier, about like that guy that's like, I want to go pro. Tell me how to get to the NFL in 3 to 4 years. And Kirby Smart can lay down a track of how to do it and explain it and hit it. And you go, I'll go do it. This is going to work here. I'm not taking any risks. There's not a lot of tricks to this. We're just going to go blunt force. We're coming after you. So, but he's got a long way to prove on that. And again, it's a different place. Before, you only had to beat the 3 or 4 other schools at the time that could recruit at your level. Now there might be 20. Oregon, you talk about Oregon and their recruiting and their NIL spending. What's Oregon's problem in building a roster? You can't, there's not enough local talent.
Right.
How does Oregon have more talent than Texas and Florida and these things? It's just very hard. There's 2 or 3 guys in Oregon a year. You're constantly have to fly guys in from somewhere else and win them over in recruiting. Well, you know what helps with that? Any company in America that has a
Nike money,
right? Why? If it was only about, if you could only hire someone because they were within 50 miles, every company would be in New York City. How do you get a good lawyer to come take a job somewhere else? Pay them more. Right. And give them an opportunity to do more. How do any job? So if they're paying, that bridges that gap. And that closes that gap where you say, all right, now all of a sudden kids are like, yeah, I don't mind going up there. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful place. And now my parents can fly up here every time they want to go to a game. It's not like we don't have the money and my parents are in Houston and when they're never going to see me play. Oh, they come up, we'll buy them a house up here. Yeah. Right. They can live right here. They can fly back and forth, whatever. I'm a pro athlete now. So it changes the game. So I think Kirby's walking into a different system where now you're trying to beat 20 teams. At no point did Nick Saban ever sit around and go, I wonder if Michigan's going to have a roster that can beat me. Well, by the end, Michigan had a roster that could beat him.
Maybe that was it. Maybe he lost Michigan. He's like, no, I'm out. Forget it. If this is the world, I'm out.
Well, there are people that would say, yeah, the world's changing. Maybe no, I don't. I think if Nick Saban's 10 years younger, he just says, all right, we'll figure this out again. Yeah. But it's a different ball game when you could look and go, yeah, Michigan's never going to have a roster that beat me. Notre Dame's never going to have a roster that beat me. Well, now they did. They had the roster.
I just don't want to make any assumptions that the next guy is going to be the next best of all time. And I think Nick Saban deserves his flowers. I think in deference to that, we have to understand that Bama's not going to be as good and nobody's going to be Bama right away because what he did over the last 17 years at Alabama was remarkable. What Dan Wetzel has done is remarkable, and he's going to keep doing it here. Of course, Dan, when people want to find you when you're not on Kings of the North, what can they do? You're going to be going to France. So how can people be getting your work?
Yeah, I got cover. You want the GOAT? I got Simone Biles here for the next couple of weeks. That's my she should be in the GOAT commercials with Coach K does them and Don Staley. I'm going to cover the Olympics, but then I'll be back on college football and NFL at Dan Wetzel on Twitter and College Football Enquirer. I do it with Pat Forty, Ross Dellinger. We will be broadcasting. Pat and I both will be broadcasting from Paris. So,
Nice.
how many college football podcasts do you know that are bi-continental? Huh? 2 weeks at least.
Well, I don't know how it works. Will you be speaking in French if you're broadcasting in France? Does
I
it
hope
translate you when you come?
I
I'd
hope
be
not.
confusing.
Google Translate.
I'm
I
just
hope
telling you,
not.
on Kings of the North, it's going to be in English.
Barely English. If you listen to the College Football Enquirer, there's great joy in my ability to mispronounce everything.
Oh.
So I barely speak English. French.
Yeah.
French.
You're half lingual. Not
It'll be funny though. I will be at the Olympics, like watching like highlights from like Big Ten Media Day and like reading transcripts. I'll be more excited to don't tell my bosses I'm more excited about the college football season. Simone's great. Simone Biles is
She's
great.
an Ohio State fan. She's an Ohio State fan.
She is Columbus, Ohio's own,
so,
right?
Feel free to ask
Houston.
if you get her get some content for us on that, that'd be great.
I'll ask what she thinks.
Will Howard question. That's all. Will Howard comment.
I don't know how much she's scanning the portal. Like she's
congratulations on your gold medal. Just real quick.
Quick question.
Have a chance, you think, in this? So, that'll be good. But Dan will be back. Dan will be joining us from time to time here on Kings of the North. So you can go listen to him on his home turf. And of course, read his writing at Yahoo Sports, but you'll also be able to catch him through the college football season. Dan Wetzel, it's been a great joy. Thanks for joining us on Kings of the North.
Thank you, Doug.
Back on Kings of the North, thanks to Dan Wetzel for that. Again, Dan is going to be making, I think, probably close to weekly appearances here on Kings of the North through the season. We like having interesting people to come on and talk college football. I will say, Landis, you're not my number one guy. Number one interesting.
I thought you were going to say we like having interesting people on. And also here's Bill.
I'm going to get, this is like our second show of talking Southern football. I'm a little sick of it. This is my max. 2 consecutive shows about the South and I'm out.
Yeah. I'm actually surprised he can even get a second one out of you. So
good. So, but it's only because Nick Saban is a son of the North, and I wanted to give him his props. So we're going to just react a little bit more to SEC Media Days. They finish up on Thursday. On Wednesday, Kalen DeBoer, the new Alabama coach, talked, and Steve Sarkisian, the Texas coach, talked. I did want to drop. We touched on this with Dan. I actually didn't get into all the research I had. Can someone Google this for me, either Mike or Bill, while I'm talking about this? Mm-hmm. Google Dennis Erickson and Kalen DeBoer, because this comparison, Dennis Erickson, we were talking about like coaches taking over for legends and how they did. Dennis Erickson took over for Jimmy Johnson at Miami. Dennis Erickson, before he took over at Miami for the 1989 season, his previous 6 years in college football were 4 years as the head coach at Idaho, 1 year as the head coach at Wyoming, 2 years as the head coach at Washington State, and he took the Miami job and he won 2 national titles in 5 years. He was awesome. He kept it completely rolling. Kalen DeBoer, his 4 years before Alabama, 2 years at Fresno State, 2 years at Washington. So I don't know like if Kalen DeBoer has called Dennis Erickson, but especially in terms of an outsider going to an established winning program and keeping it going, nobody in the modern era has done it like Dennis Erickson. He's like the example. And it's just a little bit funny to me that he was the Washington State head coach and he did it at Miami. And now Kalen DeBoer, the Washington coach, is trying to do it at Alabama. Is this a comparison that everyone is making or only?
No, I think not the Washington thing necessarily. But there are articles about like coaches who like replaced coaches who had like good runs before them. There's a little bit of that. There's a story about coaches like who won national titles and then left, which I don't really know why Kalen DeBoer is part of that, but he is. No, but like I don't see anyone making the kind of direct comparison that you're making.
Here's my direct comparison. Kalen DeBoer is Dennis Erickson. Now it just matters if is it going to work or not. Yeah. So he is the shining example of an outsider. So listening to Kalen DeBoer at SEC Media Days, he's an outsider, and he did get a couple questions about that, and I think that's good, and you give a guy a chance to explain himself. Mm-hmm. But he was running through, somebody asked a question, you've never coached south of Carbondale, Illinois, which I just think was a great phrasing to a question, right? Just a great way to ask a question. And then He did say he thought so far all the places he's coached, the place that Tuscaloosa was most like was South Dakota. So I don't know what to do with that.
Is that a compliment? I don't like
To who?
to who. Yeah, to who? I don't know.
I guess to South Dakota. I guess South Dakota, I'm sure, is lovely. I don't know. So I just thought it was. The point is this: he's answering those questions, right? And I just read the transcript. I didn't watch him do it, but I thought he did a good job. I didn't think there was anything in the transcript that he was like stood out of like, oh God, they are going to hate this answer, you know?
Yeah.
So, but he does have to navigate it a little bit. And I do think probably there's a lot of Kirby Smart's talking down there. Like Kirby Smart during his news conference was talking about how his kids were like traveling all around the world this summer. And he was like, I'm a son of the SEC. I haven't been anywhere. And it's like, that's who coaches him.
Yeah, he towed the line of saying, I'm from the SEC. I think the earth is flat or something like that. Like trying to describe the distance between like Croatia and Fiji and like not being 100% sure if the earth is actually round and doing so.
So like he did it. He was explaining how like there are, and the other thing is like if the SEC has been the best conference, there are other people. Urban Meyer is not a son of the South. He went to Florida instead of Notre Dame. Brian Kelly's not a son of the South. He went to LSU. You go where you think you can win. And in the modern era, people have thought, well, if I want to win at the highest level, I have to go south. We are here to dissuade them of that idea. But do you think that is part of what Kalen DeBoer is still trying to work through is like, I'm a guy from South Dakota who's coached at Fresno State and Washington and Indiana. And now here I am in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, taking over for a legend.
Yeah, no doubt. I thought it was, we're going to talk about Texas a little bit too, but like I thought it was interesting because those are the only two press conferences I watched on Wednesday were Sark and then I watched like the recording, went back. I didn't watch DeBoer live, but I watched the whole thing. And Kalen DeBoer's thing was like, prove to us that you actually belong here. And Sark was like, I'm not going to give you the opportunity to ask me that question. We belong here. So like, it was like the juxtaposition of the two was quite interesting. And obviously like it's easier for Sark. Like they were just in the playoff. He's not replacing Nick Saban. Like the dynamics are totally different, but there was like a different sort of tone to both press conferences that I did find interesting. But I will say like Kalen DeBoer, who was definitely up there, like trying to convince people, I think in some way that like, this is not too big for me. I can win here. Like I get all the questions. And like, if I thought I wasn't capable of doing it, I wouldn't have taken the job. Like handled it well. Like wasn't like squirming up there. Didn't look uncomfortable. I thought so. Like if that matters at all, I'm not sure if it does or not. I thought he did a good job of like presenting himself as a guy who is like more than capable of taking on probably like arguably the hardest job that anyone's ever taken on, trying to replace Nick Saban and keep the program running the way it's been running. But yeah, I think honestly, like until he does it right, until Alabama can win a national championship under Kalen DeBoer, I think he will continually be asked those kind of questions. Like, are you the right guy for this?
How crazy is it that both the Alabama coach and the Texas coach are former Washington head coaches? Wild. Kalen DeBoer, Alabama is number 2 in the 24/7 composite ratings. They're number 1 in average player rating with their recruiting class for 2025. Are you surprised at all that they are recruiting at this level still?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because I thought you lose a little something, obviously, just by not having Saban there. But I also wondered, like, if the sort of like the whole like mechanism might need to get sort of reorganized under Kalen DeBoer. Like, if in the NIL world, like how aligned Alabama seemed to be in like its roster build, like how much of that would have to be reworked under Kalen DeBoer. And it seems like maybe it started off a little slow. But now it just kind of looks like Alabama's recruiting the way you expect them to. Which, I did not think that would be the case. And it's not that I thought that Kalen DeBoer would be a bad recruiter there, but if you just sort of like look at the classes and ignore who's putting it together, like you wouldn't think there was anything different based on the talent they're acquiring.
I do think Courtney Morgan, right, their sort of personnel
He's
guy.
He's a personnel guy, yeah.
Seems really important for that.
Yep.
He's a former Michigan offensive lineman, worked at Michigan, then worked with DeBoer the last 2 years. that it's not an in-house personnel guy but that he came from Washington with DeBoer, but he seems really good at this. So that really matters. I would imagine that other schools should begin to be able to chip away at Alabama, because right now, like, if you're going to Alabama, it's like, why are you going to Alabama? It's like, well, because it's Alabama. And it's like, okay, but what does that actually mean? And if you're Steve Sarkisian or Ryan Day or Sharon Moore or Kirby Smart or Lincoln Riley or Brian Kelly, it's like, well, like, yeah, Bama's Bama, but if we're talking like big picture or like blue bloodness, we're as good as them. And what does Kalen DeBoer have that I don't have? If we're going by head coach. So I do think credit to them for being able to, they're clearly continuing the Bama aura, but I'll be curious a year from now if that's begun to rub off a little bit, because I think we've seen, it's interesting. Usually we apply that on the field, that like Larry Coker could keep it going for a little while at Miami and then it fell off. Mark Helfrich could keep it going for a little while at Oregon and then it fell off. We talk about from the on-field performance when you follow a good coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would like to apply, because Bama's been as much of a recruiting machine as it's been an on-field machine. So I want to apply that. Like, maybe now, like, they're winning this game. This first recruiting season, they're still able to keep it going. But I wonder long term, not that they're going to be bad, but just that they won't be at the top anymore. Because why would they be?
Yeah.
Is Kalen DeBoer the best head coach in college football? If he's not, why would they be? Why is Bama better than any of the other top 7 programs?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I don't know. I wonder how long that aura lasts, even if they're not. Like, it could disappear almost entirely after a year. Like, if especially if there's a 12-team playoff that doesn't involve Alabama, I think that will get a lot of eyeballs on like what exactly is going on down there in Tuscaloosa, kind of thing. But if they make the playoff, like if they're a 9-10 win team in the SEC and make the playoff, like I think that aura endures a little bit longer. I think that's actually something that Alabama or Kalen DeBoer probably more specifically can sell. Like what I did. Like, I maintained this thing. People didn't think I could do it, but here we are back in the playoff competing for a national championship. So I'm not ready to write that off just yet. And it's not like you do get like that initial boost that I think like any new coaching staff gets. Like the mystery of it all, like, kind of actually helps you more than it hurts you. And then when you get on the field, like, people will start to learn the truth about you. But I think like Alabama would have to be like really bad for the aura to totally wear away just after 1 year. So I don't know that I see teams chipping away at it in quite a significant way for this first year. If it's like a 2-year thing where Alabama's like clearly not a part of the national title picture, then I think it starts to go away.
The interesting part of it is that Saban was a defensive coach, and they built a defensive reputation, and clearly they had good quarterback play after a while. But Kalen DeBoer is an offensive coach, and what got him the job was Washington's offense last year. And is Jalen Milroe going to be able to replicate what Michael Penix did, or what Jake Haener, Kalen DeBoer's last year at Fresno State, threw 33 touchdowns and 9 interceptions? Not that Jalen Milroe is not a good quarterback, but I don't know if can be Michael Penix. And so, like, the thing that DeBoer would do best, I don't know if Bama's prepared to do that this year. And then does that chip away at it, maybe until he gets a guy in there who's going to sling it all over the field again? So it's a little bit of a square peg round hole, I think, not just culturally, but just in sort of the style of play when it comes to what DeBoer has been good at, and then what players they actually have on the roster right now in Alabama.
Yeah, but I guess my counter to that would be like, Jake Haener is not Michael Penix, and like they were both good in like different ways, right? So like that, I would find that encouraging. I think about like if I'm trying to figure out what exactly Jalen Milroe is going to be, like I think it's possible like Jalen Milroe is a drastically improved quarterback this year because of the infrastructure that he's going to find himself in. Now, it's not Ryan Grubb went to the Seahawks, right? So Ryan Grubb is not at Alabama, the OC and quarterbacks. And like, it's Kalen DeBoer's offense, right? So like that is still the same. And I think it's probably more about the offense and the environment that it can put players in, more so than it was about like the offensive coordinator. But like Grubb and DeBoer were together for a long time. So like maybe that partnership kind of getting dissolved has a more of an adverse effect on what they are offensively than I'm giving it credit for right now. But I tend to think their track record brings out a different level in Jalen Milroe. And obviously, if that does, and that's like Jalen Miller was good last year, but if he's a markedly better quarterback and like starts generating like real NFL draft buzz, which I think is possible for a guy who's athletic as athletic as he is, then I think you might see Alabama very quickly get back to recruiting quarterbacks the way it was the last few years.
I'll also be curious. Show me Roma Dunze. I don't think Roma Dunze is in Tuscaloosa right now. So
they did lose. Yeah, they lost a decent. Like not that I thought their skill was overwhelmingly good anyway, but like Isaiah Bond left, he went to Texas. Amari Niblack went to Texas. They lost somebody else too. I don't think I was looking at their starters from their playoff game, and I realized like that's not indicative of who started the entire season, but I didn't want to look that up. I just looked up who started in the Rose Bowl. The only returners who started on offense are Jalen Milroe, 3 offensive linemen, and the tight end. So like they're reworking their skill pretty significantly.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna have questions about Alabama because I don't, as I think showed in the last 55 minutes, like I'm not giving Bama the benefit of the doubt because it's not a Bama benefit of the doubt. It's a Nick Saban benefit of the doubt. And so I'm not going to give it to the uniform, and I'm not going to give it to the players' lounge, and I'm not going to give it to the stadium. And I'm just not. Can
I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Because when we did our playoff projections, you had them in and I did not. So like, how did you process those thoughts when trying to project whether Alabama will make a playoff?
It's the difference of trying to decide it. My main point is that Bama's not going to be Bama, which is better than everybody at the top. Yeah. Do I think Bama could go 10-2 in the SEC and surprise people in a couple games? And Kalen DeBoer's got a game plan for you, and like maybe Jalen Milroe went crazy. Yeah, but like my biggest issue with Alabama is any assumption of like continued top tier dominance. Right. And so, and maybe everybody's like, yeah, Nick Saban left, idiot. What? Nobody thinks that. So maybe I'm pushing back against nobody, but I just think they're normal good. So normal good might make the playoff. It might not make the playoff. I think they could jump up and bite Georgia if Kirby Smart's like, hey, all right, now Nick's gone. We're going to get, and all of a sudden Jalen Milroe runs for, 3 touchdowns and throws for 3. And it's like, oh my God, Kalen DeBoer called a double reverse in the middle of the third quarter. And like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's out there. I don't think they'll be 12 week like a machine. I think they also, Saban's a machine. So show me the game where Alabama loses to Ole Miss or something like that. I think that is, so I think there'll be more peaks and valleys than the Saban steamroller. So that's all. So I think Bama will either go 9-3 or 10-2, which to me then is like right on the edge of the playoff discussion, depending who the wins are and the losses are. But I think there's going to be a week where we're going to be like, I can't believe Bama lost. And then people might give up on Bama, and then it's going to be like, oh, Bama just beat Georgia. So that's what I think. Do you think it's going to be that kind of year? And now we're splitting hairs about whether they're going to be like the 10th seed or the first team out when it comes to playoff bracket predictions?
Yes. I could see that. Because I think their schedule's decently tough too, if I remember correctly. So I think they're going to be. Are we calling them bubble teams in college football? How are we doing that?
Can you start that, please? Please start that this moment.
All right, they're a bubble team.
Wisconsin, Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, Oklahoma. Like no Texas, but like, yeah. I'll be very I'm not penciling in a win at Wisconsin. I'm just not. Like the Georgia game on September 28th is super interesting, but at Tennessee, Missouri back-to-back in October is really tough. Mm-hmm. I think Oklahoma is going to be better than people expect. So the tough schedule is part of it also. So anyway, okay. How was Sark? I know nothing about what was said.
Yeah, Sark.
About Texas or by Texas, but he's home. It's a home game for him. They're in Dallas, man.
Yeah, which is like, that's how he started. He's like, he got up to the podium and said, welcome to Texas. Like, welcome the SEC media to Dallas, Texas. Like, welcome to my world kind of thing. He was like, honestly, if it was like, if any Texas fan had like a hope of Texas presenting itself as a team that absolutely belonged like at SEC media days for the first time, like Sark delivered. Like he was just like uber confident, like ready to roll, open that way. I think like got in front of any kind of question about like, well, what are your Texas's expectations now that you're in the SEC? Like he said, like we're Texas, like no matter what league we're in, we expect to win it. So like he was like, we're here to win the SEC is basically how I would summarize his entire press conference, which is like how he should feel because they have a very good team. But it's still like it hit your ears like a little like, oh, this guy's getting a little chesty for a team that's entering the SEC. But I liked it, honestly.
I didn't realize this until just looking at their schedule right now. They get Georgia the week after Red River. So they go Oklahoma rivalry game, Georgia. That is a tough thing to drop the Bulldogs right after your most ferocious, heated game. But they obviously have the trip to Michigan in week 2. Those are the 3 games that stand out. They don't get Alabama. They don't get Ole Miss. They don't get Missouri. So, it's pretty manageable. I'm pretty sure I'm going to pick Texas to win the SEC. So, did you feel like, were there Dog Central reporters who were sort of like, how dare you, sir? Or was everybody receptive because every question was from Houston radio stations?
I actually wasn't cataloging who was asking the questions. I'm sorry. I should have. No.
Dog Central questions. What are we doing?
I know that's my fault for dropping the ball there. But no, there weren't a lot of questions about like, how dare you? How dare you come into our conference, pounding your chest saying you're going to win this thing. He was just like, we're here. This is the deepest team I've ever had. We're going after a championship. See you losers later. Like it was, but he did like. So I've been on Georgia. Like every time we've done playoff picks, like I have had Georgia winning the SEC, and I've had long internal conversations about whether or not it should be Texas. But like every time, like I read about Texas or like hear someone from Texas talk, I'm like, Texas is winning the SEC. So like I keep getting pushed further and further down that road too. Sark did like remind me of something that did pull me back a little bit, which is that their pass defense stunk last year. So like he was pretty big on like having to get that improved, and it starts with like pass rush stuff. But then I think to myself, well, like if that's what you're looking for, you just lost like 2 of the 6 best defensive tackles in college football. So like I think there are enough questions about what exactly they're going to be defensively to pull you back from like saying unequivocally this is the best team in the SEC. But they certainly feel like Sark portrayed that they feel like they got a really good shot at winning it this year in their first year.
How many Arch Manning questions for Sark?
1, but it was the first question.
First question was about the backup quarterback.
Yeah.
What % chance do you think there is that Arch Manning takes the job from Quinn Ewers this year? Not because of injury, but because of performance.
10, maybe. I think it's pretty low. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so too. And again, like I think it's a similar discussion to sort of what we've talked about with Julian Sayin and Ohio State, except I'd take Quinn Ewers over Will Howard or Devin Brown, but I'd also take Arch Manning over Julian Sayin just because it's a year 2 guy versus a true freshman. So I think it's like it's a similar but elevated in both ways discussion. Arch Manning is ready to start. There's no question about that. I was looking up stuff the other day. I don't even remember what show it was for. Maybe it was on here, but it was just like the idea of like, it was the Avery Johnson, Kansas State discussion. It's like, there's the top 9 quarterbacks in that class, the guys who are true sophomores right now, 3 are starting this season. Nico Iamaleava, Avery Johnson, and Jackson Arnold at Tennessee, Kansas State, and Oklahoma. 4 have transferred, including Dante Moore leaving UCLA to go to Oregon, and only 2 are sitting around and waiting, and one of them's Arch Manning. So it's like the idea, I am dumbfounded. How did this, this is one of those, if we're not going to talk about the video game, we may as well talk about Arch Manning and put it in the headline of the show. Isn't it crazy? Is it not a little bit crazy that like Arch Manning chose this for himself? Like that's, and that Arch Manning was like, yeah, no, I'll sit. I could go anywhere, but I'm not from Texas. Is he from Texas?
No, he's from Louisiana.
Okay, I wanted to make sure. I didn't know if Coopers and the family moved.
They're citizens of the world, really. Like they're not from anywhere. They're from whichever corporate entity is paying them the most money to sell their product at that time.
They're from Omaha. Why did they pick Texas? Like, why did they choose to go sit for 2 years? He could play anywhere. I don't know.
I actually kind of applaud the decision because Arch Manning played at a pretty crappy level of high school football, and I think needed time to develop. And could have
play
gone
like the level of high school football where like everybody on the team wore like seersucker suits and that kind of thing.
It's just I mean like
boat shoes.
I just
Those
like
guys aren't very tough.
Talking to people that like I know who live down there who are more familiar with Louisiana high school football than I am. It wasn't like he was going out week after week playing the big dogs in Louisiana. Like he was playing small private school football in Louisiana. So like there was going to be a major uptick in level of competition, and I think good sort of like self-awareness by him and his family to know that like he could have started as a true freshman. It probably would have been pretty ugly. So why not go somewhere where you can afford to develop a little bit? Maybe they thought he'd be starting by the time he was a sophomore. Because I guess Quinn Ewers could have turned pro after last season, right? But no, I don't. I think they knew that Arch probably needed to sit a year, and if you're going to sit a year and you're QB2 now at Texas, like I don't know, it's not the worst position to be in.
I think if I did it today, my national championship game pick would be Texas versus Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
What if that pick came with the idea that it was Arch Manning versus Julian Sand? Would that is that
you're gonna take the Quinn Ewers storyline away from everybody?
Yeah,
for when they play Ohio State. Good, actually, I would actually welcome that because it would be annoying. Quinn Ewers was in Columbus for 3 months.
We're doing Quinn Ewers shows nonstop. We're gonna do it like if Texas and Ohio State are like 1 and 2 at some point in mid-October, we're doing a Quinn Ewers topper on every single episode of Kings of the North. Quinn Ewers watch. Son of the North. He's not. He's a cousin of the North. He was like our crazy cousin who came and lived here for a year and then went home. All right. Anything else about Sark or Texas that came up that the folks need to know about?
No. He said he thinks they have the deepest receiver room in the country, which is a heck of a thing to say a year after losing they lose Xavier Worthy and somebody else whose name is escaping me. But like they're totally revamping their receiver room. And he's like, no, we have the deepest receiver room we've ever had. So that was interesting.
That could be interesting, right? We can have an Ohio State, Oregon, Texas conversation. There's the top three best receiver rooms in the country, probably. I
mean, I wouldn't I don't know that I'd put Texas up there.
But Sark just did it. Are you what? You're doubting Sark? You just said that.
No, I'm sure that Sark basically just has Alabama's receiver room from last year now. I'm sure he'll get more out of them than Alabama did, but I wouldn't put them in the same conversation as Ohio State and Oregon or Iowa State.
Oh, that's right. What am I doing? I'm turning my back on my guy Jalen Noel. Okay, that'll do it. So no Southern talk till the season starts. Can't do it anymore. We're going to do a bunch of stuff from Big Ten Media Days next week. Get subscribed. If you're not subscribed to this channel, if you somehow are coming across this and you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel and or the podcast on your favorite podcast feed, just get subscribed because we're going to probably be dropping more stuff next week than we usually do. Instead of 2 shows, we'll probably have 3. And we probably will have some live shows in the evening wrapping up sort of just everything we heard and beyond like the interviews that we're doing. So I think you're going to get 5 or 6 different shows from us next week. Mm-hmm. And we don't want you to miss any. So subscribe, tell a friend to subscribe. We're spreading our wings here. We're talking about Georgia. We're talking about Alabama. We're going to Big 12 Media Days, but like Big 10 Media Days is, that's the heart of the North. No offense to anybody else, but these 16 of our 18 teams are here, and we may even acknowledge the existence of UCLA and USC, depending. Well, I don't know. Do we want Lincoln Riley on the show? If Lincoln Riley comes to the table, I think we tell him to get lost, right? No? We bring him honorary. We have to decide a name for them.
Yeah. What do we call them?
So we'll figure it out. But like, I can't pretend that Los Angeles is the North. We can't pretend that. That's a lie.
We're not going to do that. Yeah. We're not liars.
But whenever USC plays a more Southern team, then we will lean that way. Like, I think they're going to beat LSU because LSU can cram it. I just don't think USC can cram it quite as hard. That's all. All right. Thanks to our producer, Mike Yarostowski, as always, for making us look good and sound good. Thanks to Dan Wetzel for joining us. That was fun. And again, Dan is going to be in the rotation here on Kings of the North. So if you like that, more of that to come. And as always, Philly Billy is here to stay. So he's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was Kings of the North.